There's a verse from the Psalms that says, "The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord." We're continuing to read through the Bible in a year, and we're on Numbers 14 through 16. And in this section, we see that if God is not with us, if God is not for us, if God is not on our side, we don't have a chance. We can have all the plans and all of the strategy, but if our hearts are not right, if we are bent on evil and wickedness, eventually it will come to failure. And so we see that in chapter 14, when many of them rebel, and God brings judgment on them, except for Joshua and Caleb. And it says in chapter 14 that God had tested them 10 times and they did not obey him. I don't know if it was exactly 10 times, but that number 10 reminds them of the 10 plagues that God gave in Egypt. And so he's telling the people, you're just like the Egyptians. You're no different. You're hardening your heart to God's promises. And because they hardened their heart to God's promises, God was not going to bless their efforts to enter into the promised land. They were going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And that first generation, all those fighting men that were counted in the beginning of the book of Numbers, they would all die in the wilderness. And they realize how stupid they were, and so now they want to go up into the promised land. They want to fight, but God tells them, if I'm not with you, you're going to lose. You're not going to win. And so that's what happens. They try on their own and they don't win. And so we need to be sure that what we do in prayer, whatever it is, all of our plans, we end our prayers and our plans just like Jesus taught us with the prayer, "Your will be done, God." You go with us, your will be done. Here's our idea, here's our thoughts, here's our plans, you go with us. Now, as we've heard in the past, we get a series of laws again on sacrifices. Now, I think here in chapter 15, the reason it's put here is because we're seeing again the distinction between somebody who sins unintentionally and then willful sin. And it says in Psalm 19, who can number their sins or count their sins? Forgive me of all my hidden faults, but keep me from willful sins. May they not come over me. And there is a difference between a willful, premeditated sin. When God gives them the opportunity and tells them what to do, and then they continue to harden their heart to what God promises and what God says, that intentional sin, that destroys your faith. And so I think that's why in chapter 15 you have laws on sacrifices between unintentional and intentional sin. That's not saying that you couldn't still be forgiven. It's just when you continue in that state of hardening your heart and rebelling against God and not listening to his voice, that will destroy your faith. That will lead to unbelief eventually. It might get a little bit surprised with the high standards of the Sabbath, but that goes back to intentional sins. Right after there, a man is stoned for carrying wood on the Sabbath. That seems a little heavy-handed, right? Well, the intentional sin of God saying, don't work, and then the crassness of picking up wood and walking in front of the community, that open, willful, intentional rebellion, almost sticking it to God, that needed to be dealt with, especially amongst God's people. And so God tells them to put tassels on their clothing as a reminder for all these laws, a reminder of the Sabbath law, a reminder of the way they're to live, to keep this in front of them so they would not walk into intentional sin. Finally, in chapter 16, something we see over and over again, there's rebellion amongst the leaders. A group of Levites called the Korahites from the Koraite clan. They, very similar to Miriam and Aaron, they want everyone to be holy. And this group of the priests, they were the ones who were not able to go into the temple or the tabernacle. They were the ones who carried the tabernacle furnishings and tent and all that stuff. They didn't do the sacrifices, but they were in charge of traveling and carrying. And so they didn't want to accept their role as to what they were supposed to do. And so they wanted to take a different role. And unfortunately, because of their rebellion, because of their arrogance, because of not being grateful for the role that they had been given, they've seen the consequences for their sin. They're punished. And so I think we need to see the blessing and the beauty of the roles that God has given us. I'm not saying you can't strive to get, continue to learn new skills and grow, but be careful that you don't have an ungrateful heart. Look at all the ways that God has blessed you and the roles that he's given you and the leadership he's given you, opportunities he's given you, and be careful about coveting somebody else's role. You might covet somebody else's leadership, somebody else's opportunity, somebody else's success, but what you don't often see is the challenges and the struggles of somebody else's success. You really want, very often I think we want to exchange the success of others with our success, but we don't want to take on the burden that they've experienced with some of their trials and suffering and loss in some of those different roles. So learn to be content. I need to learn this too. Learn to be content in the role that God has given you, and work with all of your might, like it says in Colossians chapter 3, as if you're working for the Lord. Okay, keep reading. Don't give up.